off. Okay, you guys ready? Okay. Levels of organization. You should be able to at least put these in order. Okay. Tell me something about each one of them. But I think that's pretty. I think you guys know what chemical goes to cellular, cellular to tissue. Chemical. What I want. This one right here. This is a good point. Atoms in life have two roles. They have a structural function and a functional role. Structural, what I mean by structural, well, we combine them to make molecules, right? Take two atoms, link them, I got a molecule. I do that, I got molecules of life. But those have a functional role. I can move atoms around to do stuff, right? If I want a muscle to work, I can move calcium atoms into a muscle cell and get a contraction. If I want muscle to relax, I can pull those calcium ions out. When I come to the neurotransmitters, I can take sodium and potassium and do a little movement of those atoms and get a signal from one end to the axon to the other. So the movement of atoms also is important in life. What I want you to know, the atoms that make up life. I want you to at least know something about the atoms that make up life, right? We've got carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, phosphorus, sulfur. Not only that, but if I tell you a macromolecule, I would expect you to give me an idea of the proportions you're going to see in these. Example, a lipid. If I say what's in a lipid, what are you going to tell me? There's a lot of carbon. There's a lot of hydrogen in that lipid. There's not a lot of oxygen. That's really important because it makes it nonpolar. If I say here's a carbohydrate, what's that going to have? Well, it's going to have a lot of carbon, a lot of oxygen, and a lot of hydrogen. If I say an amino acid, what's some big ones in an amino acid? What up there do you think you're going to see in an amino acid? Nitrogen, exactly, because amino in amino acid is nitrogen. You're going to see oxygen, you're going to see hydrogen, you're going to see carbon. Actually, you're going to see sulfur in one of them, but that's not too important. But I want you to know things like there's a lot of nitrogen in an amino acid. DNA, nucleic acids, what are you going to see in those? The types of molecules, you need to know all four of these. I will be straight with you that you have to know this going into it. If I say what are the four macromolecules of life, you have to know these. The nucleic acids, your DNA, your RNAs, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. You have to know this for the test. I'm going through these because you will want to review these, but I'm trying to hit the high points in 20 some odd minutes. Okay, have an idea of at least the the 11 body systems. Okay, so for example, if I said the Integument System, what is this part of? Let me go to another slide where it's not as... Yeah, oh, that's even worse. Okay, that one's better. That one's better. I want you to know at least the 11 body systems, right? If I said what, I'll tell you, last semester on the extra credit, I said, can you name the 11 body systems? And a lot of you guys are going into nursing, right? Okay, I think you should at least be able to, if I said, name the 11 recognized organ systems, spit them off for me. That's kind of your trade you're going into. I would say the basic functions. I would say know the basic functions. And I'm not going to hit too much on these. Let me just tell you some of the functions I want you to know for the test. The Integument System, everyone knows it's protection, right? But I also want you to know what? It has some role in immunity. It has normal flora on the outside that's going to protect you from a lot of your pathogens. I'm going to go through this fast so I can get through all my notes. The muscles, hey, look at that temperature, your shiver response. When you're cold, you're shaking. Why? It's going to warm you up. Your structural, your skeletal. Why? You should know that it's what you hit your muscles to. I think you should know that. But I also think I want you to know this. Look at the red marrow. Inside in our bones, we're making our red blood cells, our white blood cells. Nervous system, that's self-explanatory. Digestive system, you got that one. That one's good. Some of these are self-explanatory that I'm not going to worry about them. The lymphatic system. That's where you're going to do antigen presenting. Really important in the immune response. How your antibody, how you present your cells to the, how you present your antigens to your immune system. Lymphatic system. Okay, I think we know what the reproductive system does, right? Okay. Okay, homeostasis. This is the one I want you to know. What is homeostasis? It's what? It's you have an internal condition, right? Temperature, blood sugar, whatever. It likes to be at one level. It's like Goldilocks. You get too high, it's no good. You get too low, it's no good. Okay? You have a certain blood sugar. If it gets too low, okay, the neurons in your brain don't have the glucose they need to make ATP with. You know, you start getting dizzy and mind starts going. It gets too high, you can go into shock. I mean, you have a certain level of blood sugar you like, and your body has systems to keep it at one certain level. Feedback systems. I want you to know what a feedback system is. A feedback loop. And that's when the product of an action can go back and regulate what started that action. That's all a feedback loop is. And we gave some examples of this, and I'll give you some examples that make it a little bit more clear. But just know what a feedback loop is, the idea of feedback. Because that's ultimately what controls our processes. That we have enzymatic actions, we have cellular processes, and the only checks and balance on those are the results that those processes do can loop back and turn on and off that process. And we said what? To feedback systems, we have 5 parts. We have a stimulus, a change. I'm going to give an example of this. Control condition is something in our body that we want to regulate. Blood sugar, CO2, temperature. We have receptors that are going to detect that. You know, we have chemoreceptors that are going to help detect blood CO2 levels. We have stretch receptors that are going to detect if our blood pressure is too high or too low. We have receptors that detect this. Receptors are going to go to a control center in the brain, like the cardiac control center in the brain. Tell our heart to go faster, tell our heart to go slower. It's going to send that signal to an effector. Cardiac control center might send it to the brain or to the heart and say, beat faster, beat slower. And ultimately, that effector, our heart's beating faster or beating slower, that's going to cause a change that will loop back and be picked up by our receptors. For example, I'm running. That's my stimulus, right? I'm running. Controlled condition. My CO2 in my blood starts going up. I'm metabolizing more. CO2 starts going up. The receptors say, more CO2 in the blood. More CO2. We need oxygen. Cardiac control center in my brain says, you know what? You have high CO2 levels. You need to start breathing more. Your heart needs to start going faster because you need to start pumping more blood to get rid of that CO2. Tells my heart, beat faster. My heart beats faster because it's beating faster. I'm pumping more blood through my lungs and getting more of that CO2 out. I have less CO2 in my blood. Receptors then detect that. And then they say to my brain, hey, the CO2 levels are going down. The heart doesn't have to beat as fast. So the process The effect that my effectors did, my heart beating faster, made a physiological change that loops back and is picked up by the brain. That's feedback. Okay. And we talked about each one of these. I'm not going to go through each one. But just have an idea of what each one of them are in that process. We talked about positive feedback, negative feedback. The major one in physiology is negative feedback. There are some examples of positive feedback, yes. But physiologically, the one we use the most by far is negative feedback. You know, it's hot inside, I begin to sweat, I cool down, I stop sweating. Because what told me to start sweating, right, was my body temperature, and since that's been regulated, I don't have to sweat as much. So, these are just examples, and just example I just gave before. But just understand, for the test, understand the series of events that goes in order. Okay. Understand the series of events. Don't try to memorize specific examples. I'm not going to say, describe what happens to your heart rate with blah, blah, blah. Okay, I don't want you to know specific examples. That'll come later. What I want you to know is the process of events. You get a stimuli, right? Something changes. Temperature goes down. CO2 goes up. Blood sugar levels go up. Something changes. You have receptors in your body that detect the changes. That change is then transmitted to the brain. Somewhere in the brain, there's a region which is going to monitor this. Your brain comes to a decision as to how to best adapt to those conditions. It sends those signals to effectors. Effectors, your heart. Glands that can release insulin. Glands that can release glucagon. Something's going to do something here. And that effector is going to release something or do something that will cause a change. Releases insulin. So when the effector releases insulin, blood sugar levels go down. Releases glucagon. Blood sugar levels go up. Tells the heart to beat faster. CO2 levels will go down. Something that this effector does is going to change this control condition and cause a change. And this system hole right here is the feedback. That's the feedback loop. Okay. This would be a good test question, is I might have a diagram like this without any lines pointing to it, and I'd ask you, what are those lines? What's a frontal plane? You know, vertical plane. These are really. I'll tell you, this is gold for a test question. Is I want you to know to have this diagram without any kind of words on it. I'm not going to ask you any of the. I'm not going to ask you this. I'm not going to ask you about an oblique plane. But the ones that I mentioned, you should know on the test. Or at least if you see them. Let me say it this way. Do you need to know the exact definition here? No. What you do need to know is if you see this diagram, can you connect the type of planes with the diagram? Yes. You need to know a few directional terms, yes. We'll get to those in a second. And again, you should know this for lab. So let me be very clear on this for the test. Know this kind of diagram and know the planes relative to the diagram. And back to the directional terms. Let me do that one. Okay. What do you want you to know for directional? Proximal and distal. What's distal and what's proximal? From an attachment point, the point closest to an attachment point is the proximal. The point furthest away from your attachment point is a distal. For example, on your hands, right? You got fingernails. That's on your distal region of your finger because your finger attaches here, right? So the distal's here, proximal's here. On your arm, distal, proximal. Because where's my arm? It's attaching to the trunk of my body here. That's where it attaches. Closest to the attachment point is proximal. Furthest away from the attachment is distal. Inferior, superior. Inferior is closest to the head. Superior is closest to the head. Inferior is furthest away from the head. And then the medial is the middle part. And then going off of that is lateral. And then finally, you all know this one. Is this the left or the right side? Right side. Is this the left or the right side? The left, exactly. It's patient left, patient right, not your left, not your right. So that's the directional ones are distal, proximal, superior, inferior, medial, lateral, and what the patient left, what the patient right is. Okay. Get the next one here. I just did chapter 3 today, right? Or chapter 4?